The desert didn't look like death at first. It looked like light, too much of it. The kind of light that stripped the color from the world, that bleached bone and skin alike. The horizon shimmered in waves, beautiful and cruel, and the air itself felt alive, breathing heat in steady rhythm. For the young cowboys who had never crossed it, the sight was awe before it was fear. It looked endless, yes, but not impossible. They had water, they had horses, they had the stubborn courage of youth. What they didn't have yet was understanding. Understanding came slow. It arrived with thirst, with fatigue, with the moment you realized the land wasn't just empty, it was waiting. Waiting to see if you deserved to live through it. The horses knew it first. Animals always did. Their nostrils flared, their ears twitched, and their hooves hesitated before stepping onto the shifting ground. The young riders patted their necks, whispered words of comfort that fooled no one, and rode on. The first day was bearable, the second brutal, the third unforgettable. The sun didn't set so much as collapse. The heat lingered after dusk, clinging to the earth. The cowboys dismounted to walk beside their horses, leading them through stretches of dry wash where the sand shifted like water. The stars came out, thousands of them, but offered no mercy, only light sharp enough to make the darkness feel deeper. Their horses' sides heaved with effort, sweat dried into white streaks of salt. Every few miles the cowboys stopped to check their hooves, brush away burrs, whisper quiet apologies. The bond between man and animal wasn't sentimental, it was survival. A cowboy could live a day without water, maybe two, a horse couldn't. So they rationed carefully, filling tin cups from a single canteen, letting the horses drink first. Always first. The men would lick the rim of the pan afterward, swallowing whatever drops remained. There was no heroism in it, just necessity. They rode by dawn, rested at noon, and prayed by night. The prayers weren't to God, not exactly. They were to the horizon itself, to that line of blue shadow that promised escape. "Let us reach it," they whispered. "Let them make it." When they did find water, a shallow pool caught between rocks, or the faint trickle of a spring, it was like stumbling into a dream. The horses went first, eyes wide, trembling as they drank. The men followed, collapsing to their knees beside them. In those moments, gratitude replaced exhaustion. Every drop was a miracle, every sip a blessing. And when the water ran out again, they carried on, because they had no choice. The desert's cruelty wasn't loud. It was quiet, methodical. It wore you down one breath at a time. It taught patience and humility. Two things young cowboys rarely had before they met it. Some of the horses faltered early. A stumble here, a swollen leg there. The men tried to help, lifting hooves, wrapping strips of cloth, easing burdens. But sometimes, mercy had to take another shape. There were moments when a cowboy would kneel beside a fallen horse, stroke its mane, and whisper thanks before raising his gun. The shot echoed flat, carried nowhere. The others would look away. No one spoke. They'd bury the horse shallow, mark the spot with a stone, and move on. Each step afterward felt heavier, because out there grief didn't come in tears, it came in silence. For the ones that survived, the cowboys gave everything. They tore the linings from their coats to cover the animals' flanks, broke open canteens to soak cloths for their mouths, and cut their own rations to lighten saddlebags. The desert changed a man's idea of loyalty. You learned that love wasn't softness, it was endurance. At night, when the cold came, sharp and biting, they'd sleep pressed against their horses' sides, feeling the steady warmth of the creature's heart through the dust and sweat. It was the only proof of life in a world that otherwise felt made of ghosts. The desert sky was so full of stars, it looked like it could swallow you. And in a way, it did. It swallowed noise, fear, and everything that wasn't essential. What remained was raw and simple. Hunger, thirst, hope, and the quiet rhythm of breath beside breath. They crossed into the fourth day, weaker now. The horses' steps slowed, their heads hung low. The cowboys' lips bled from dryness. Still they kept going, following the memory of maps that were more rumor than truth. One of the young men, barely 18, began to talk to his horse as if to himself. "We'll make it, boy," he said. "We've got to." The horse flicked an ear, understanding in a way that only an animal born of the wild could. They shared a language that didn't need words, one made of rhythm and trust, built from every mile of dust between them. And in that brutal, endless landscape, that bond was the only thing that still felt alive. Because in the desert, you didn't survive for yourself. You survived together. The desert began to lose its shape. By the fifth day, the horizon shimmered like glass, sky and earth melting into one cruel illusion. You couldn't tell where land ended and air began. The world was light and heat and nothing else. The cowboys didn't speak anymore. Words wasted breath, their lips were split, their throats burned, their eyes stung with sweat and sand. But still, they moved. Always forward. Because stopping meant dying, and dying meant leaving your horse to face the desert alone. The animals were slowing. You could see it in the way they lifted their hooves, hesitant, deliberate, as if every step asked a question. Can I still go on? Their hides had lost their shine, their ribs showed sharp through dust-caked skin. The sound of their breathing filled the silence, a heavy, rasping rhythm that was somehow both heartbreaking and holy. The young cowboy named his horse June, though he didn't know why. Maybe because June sounded like warmth and grass, things that belonged to a world far from this one. He talked to her when he walked, his hand resting on her neck to steady them both. "You and me," he murmured, voice rough as gravel. "We're going to see green again." At midday they came upon a dry riverbed. Once it had been wide and alive, but now it was just dust and memory. The men dug with their hands, desperate. Sand filled the holes faster than they could empty them. The horses watched, their heads hanging, their eyes dull. Then by some mercy the youngest horse pawed at the ground and uncovered damp earth. They dug deeper, and water seeped through, brown, hot, bitter, but real. The men cried without sound. They let the horses drink first, always first. Then they pressed their faces to the mud, taking turns sipping the life they'd begged for. That night, they didn't light a fire. The wind was high and they had no strength for flame. They lay under the open sky, bodies trembling from exhaustion, eyes on the stars that refused to move. The horses stood close, silent silhouettes against the moonlight. In the darkness, one of the older cowboys whispered a story about a horse that had carried a dying man through the desert and dropped dead the moment it reached shade. "They say the horse didn't stop until the man was safe," he said. "That's what they do, they keep their promises." No one answered. But every man there reached a hand toward his own horse, touching hide or mane or stirrup leather. It wasn't worship. It was gratitude. The next morning one horse didn't rise. The cowboy knelt beside it, his face gray, his hands shaking. The others stood back. There was nothing to say. He took off the saddle, unbuckled the bridle, and rested his forehead against the animal's neck. "Thank you," he whispered, voice cracking. He didn't fire a shot. There were no bullets left to waste. They walked on, leaving the body to the sun. The heat grew worse. The air felt thick, as though the desert itself was pressing down on them. Mirage after mirage appeared, lakes that vanished, shadows that danced. The horses' hooves cracked and bled. The men's boots did the same. By then, everything was instinct. You didn't think about surviving. You just did what came next, one more step, one more breath, one more mile. When the wind rose, carrying sand like rain, they huddled together, men and horses, a single mass of flesh and will. The storm screamed around them, pelting skin raw, burying everything in motionless waves. Hours passed, maybe days. Time had no meaning. When it finally broke, they emerged half-buried, faces coated with dust. But they were alive. So were the horses. That was when the young cowboy started to laugh, a low, cracked sound that frightened even him. It wasn't joy. It was disbelief. Against all logic, against all cruelty, they were still moving. They found shade that evening, just a slab of rock jutting from a canyon wall, but it felt like heaven. The horses collapsed first, legs folding beneath them. The cowboys followed, lying beside them, the smell of sweat and sand thick in the air. The silence was immense. It pressed against their ears, deeper than sound. Then, softly, one of the men began to hum. It wasn't a song anyone knew, just a rhythm that rose and fell like breathing. The others joined in, a faint harmony of cracked voices blending with the desert wind. Even the horses seemed to listen, their heads lifting, their ears turning toward the sound. It was the closest thing to peace they'd had in days. When the song faded, the young cowboy looked at June, her eyes half closed, her chest rising slow but steady, and felt something shift inside him. A realization as vast as the sky. He understood that they weren't crossing the desert together. The desert was crossing them. It was changing them, burning away everything unnecessary until only what mattered remained. The will to keep moving, the love that asked for nothing in return, the bond that needed no language. He reached out, resting his palm against June's shoulder. Her skin was hot, trembling, alive. "Almost there," he whispered. He didn't know if it was true. He said it anyway. And somewhere in that moment, under that pitiless sky, surrounded by endless dust, the boy who'd started the journey became a man. Not through strength or victory, but through care, through loyalty, through the simple, aching act of keeping another life alive. The desert didn't reward him. It didn't have to, it just let him go on breathing. The horizon never changed, but something in the air did. A thin breeze began to move, dry but cooler, and with it came the faintest scent of grass. Distant, fragile, almost imagined. The men noticed it first, then the horses. Their ears pricked up, their heads lifted, nostrils flaring. It was hope, and it was dangerous. Hope could keep you walking, or it could break you when the mirage vanished. By now, the young cowboy could feel every rib on June's side. Her breathing came shallow, but her eyes still carried that same steady fire. She didn't know about maps or distances or reasons. She only knew to keep moving because he was moving too. That was enough. They had almost nothing left to give. One man's canteen was empty, another's horse lame. They stripped the gear, redistributed the weight, and walked together under a sun that had stopped feeling like light and started feeling like judgment. They spoke in fragments now, half sentences cut off by thirst. "Feels cooler. Might be hills ahead." "Don't say might," someone muttered. The desert listened. Every few miles they stopped and poured sand from their boots. The horses pawed at the ground, sniffing for moisture that wasn't there. When one stumbled, all of them stopped, no matter how close they thought they were to water. You didn't abandon an animal out here. You rested it, rubbed its legs, waited for it to breathe steady again. If it didn't rise, you stayed until the choice became impossible. The young cowboy had seen death before, but not like this. Not stretched out over hours, silent and slow, stripped of drama. The desert didn't care enough to make dying quick. He refused to let June fall. He'd walk until his feet bled raw if that's what it took. He poured the last of his water into his hat and let her drink from it, his hands trembling as he held it steady. She drank greedily, her tongue rough against the felt, and when it was gone, she nudged him once as if to say thank you. It was small, that moment, but it was everything. By evening, the light softened. The sun sagged red into the dunes, and for the first time in days, the sky looked merciful. The cowboy stopped in a shallow basin where the ground grew firm and cool. The wind carried the smell of sage, real, not imagined. They made camp without a fire, afraid of drawing attention but mostly too tired to care. The men leaned against their saddles, the horses standing over them, heads low. The silence wasn't empty now. It was full, of exhaustion, of reverence, of the strange bond born from suffering shared. The young cowboy lay awake, staring at the stars. They didn't twinkle out here. They burned. He thought about every horse he'd ever seen in his short life, those strong, proud creatures running free across plains. He'd always imagined them as symbols of wildness, of freedom. But now he saw something deeper. Horses weren't wild by nature. They were loyal. They followed men through storms, deserts, and hunger, because somewhere in their hearts they believed in us. It was trust, pure and unspoken, stronger than fear. He rolled onto his side, reaching out to touch June's neck. Her skin was warm and quivering. "You saved me more than I've saved you," he said softly. "Just keep going, girl. Just one more dawn." When he slept, he dreamed of water, not the river back home, but something else. Clear pools shimmering beneath strange cliffs, sunlight breaking on ripples. He could hear horses drinking, their sighs deep and slow. He woke with tears drying on his face. The morning came cool. A wind from the west carried dust and something else. Birds, tiny black specks circling in the distance. The men saw it together. "They're flying low," someone whispered. "There's water near." And suddenly every ounce of fatigue turned into fire. They mounted up, the horses trembling but willing. The young cowboy leaned forward, whispering, "Easy, June, don't rush." They crested a ridge, and there it was. Not a mirage, not a dream. A valley spread out below, dotted with green. A narrow stream cut through the sand, shimmering like silver under the morning sun. For a long time no one moved. They just stared, afraid that one step would make it disappear. Then June took the first one. Slow, cautious, steady. And when her hooves hit the damp earth at the edge of the stream, the sound broke something in him. He slid off her back and fell to his knees, pressing his hands into the wet soil. It was real. The horses drank until their bellies swelled. The men splashed water on their faces, their arms, their necks. They laughed, hoarse, broken laughter that sounded like sobbing. For the first time in weeks, they stopped thinking about survival. They rested. That day, under the shade of thin mesquite, the young cowboy cleaned June's hooves, brushed her coat with what was left of his bandana, and whispered every word of gratitude he knew. She dozed standing up, ears twitching, the faint rhythm of her breathing filling the air. The others did the same, tending to their horses with the tenderness of men who knew exactly what they owed. They spoke softly, moved slowly. The desert had taught them to handle life like it was glass, precious, fragile, irreplaceable. By evening the color had returned to the world. The sky burned orange, the grass shimmered gold, and the wind smelled of rain far off. The men sat around a small fire this time, safe enough to let it glow. Someone pulled a harmonica from his pack and played a song so low and sweet it could have been a prayer. The horses stood nearby, shadows against the fading light, their heads turned toward the music. And in that moment the cowboys understood. The desert hadn't beaten them. It had refined them. It had stripped away every false thing until all that was left was loyalty and breath. You couldn't own a horse after that. You could only honor it. The young cowboy lay back, hat over his face, listening to the sound of June grazing. He smiled, tired and content. The desert had given nothing freely, but what it gave forever. When dawn came, the herd was ready. Saddles cinched, canteens filled, the men climbed back on, turning their faces toward the horizon that had once seemed endless. Now it didn't look like an enemy. It looked like possibility. And as the sun rose, blinding and gold, the cowboys rode forward, quiet, steady, their horses alive beneath them, hearts beating the same rhythm as the land. They had crossed the desert. But more than that, the desert had crossed them. Long after they were gone, the tracks they left behind filled with sand. That was the desert's way. It never kept the proof. It kept only the memory of movement, the faint idea that life had passed through and refused to surrender. Years later, when the young cowboy was no longer young, he would ride the edge of that same country again and feel the ghosts beneath him. He'd find bits of old gear half buried, rusted buckles, a horseshoe, a length of rein, and he'd smile because he knew what they meant. They weren't relics. They were reminders that men and horses had once crossed where no one thought they could. He still rode with June until the end. Her muzzle had turned grey, her pace slower, but her eyes never lost that look of understanding. He'd talk to her the same way he had in the heat, quiet words about weather, about distance, about nothing and everything. They didn't need answers. The sound was enough. When rain finally came to that desert, rare, soft, smelling of dust and lightning, he led her out into it. The drops hit their faces like blessings. She lifted her head and closed her eyes. He did the same. For a heartbeat, the land that had tried to take everything from them gave something back. He knew then that what they'd survived together was more than geography. It was faith. Not the kind you prayed with, but the kind that lived in bone and breath, the faith that something beside you could carry your fear and never falter. That was the lesson every cowboy carried long after the drives were gone, after the railroads came and the open ranges closed. The West wasn't built on gunfights or gold. It was built on trust between creatures that couldn't speak the same language but understood the same truth. That to keep moving you had to believe in someone other than yourself. People would ask him about those crossings, about the heat and the hunger, about how he'd kept his horse alive when everything else wanted to die. He'd laugh softly, thumb the brim of his hat and say, "You don't keep 'em alive. You just keep 'em company till the world gives up trying to stop you." Sometimes, when the nights were still and the air dry as powder, he'd wake and think he could hear it again. The rhythm of hooves through sand, the faint snort of a horse breathing beside him, the echo of his own younger heartbeat keeping time with hers. It was never a haunting. It was a homecoming. He'd rise before dawn, pour coffee that tasted like dust and smoke, and watch the first light spill across the desert. Somewhere out there, far beyond sight, were the trails they'd ridden and the graves of horses who hadn't made it. He didn't mourn them anymore. He honored them the way the desert did, with silence. The sun climbed and the color returned to the world, gold, copper, and the endless blue above. The same light that had once blinded him now felt gentle, almost kind. The desert was no softer, but he had learned how to see it. He reached out, ran a hand down June's neck, and whispered, "Still here." The words were barely sound, but the desert heard them anyway. It always did. And when they rode on, two shadows crossing the sand, the wind moved behind them, wiping away their tracks again, proof that the land never really belonged to anyone. It only loaned itself to those who respected it enough to listen. That's how young cowboys kept their horses alive across the long crossings. They listened. To the earth, to the wind, to the pulse of a creature that trusted them with everything it had. They learned that mercy wasn't weakness, it was strength, that survival wasn't a battle, it was a conversation. And somewhere out there, under that same unending sky, that conversation still goes on. Hoofbeats like heartbeats, rising and fading, echoing across the quiet miles of a land that remembers everything, even when it says nothing.